page 1. Page 2. Page 3. And page 4.
You did.
Give Ted a chance to take a look at the minutes and see if he has any corrections to be
I
made.
do not.
Okay. So hearing no corrections, all those in favor of approving the minutes of May 2nd, 2017, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And no abstentions? This is now time for public comment. If anyone has any public comment to make on any issues on the agenda or not, this is your time to do it. Yes? Please identify yourself.
Christopher Andre. Thank you, Rick, for the information you gave me. But I would like to say that the spreadsheets that look like this are different. This is the one that was supplied at the meeting, and this is the one I just opened up today. Haven't had a chance to really dive into them to determine why, but you know, I will. After the last meeting, after some of the comments that were made regarding the cost per ERU and the requirement to have that, the costs that were presented across the board represented an increase in the amount that you're going to have to raise the ERU, you know, starting now. That's the way I understood the comment. So I went back to the house and I looked at some of the information that has been presented over the last 6 months, including the spreadsheet that was presented by Rick, I think 9/20. And to me, it raised a lot of questions. I don't understand why the figures that were presented last week are a complete increase from where we are now. I think we need to look at that and understand if that's the case or if it's not the case. And quickly, some of the other things I did is I asked questions to myself about, you know, the dredging. I'm an estimator by trade, and so I took the plans that I had available to me for some of the ponds in Williston, and I was able to calculate, for instance, what the 4 bays are going to hold. And the average 4 bay is going to hold 57 cubic yards. From there I go and I estimate how much it's going to cost for the average pond, and I get something like $4,000 instead of 10. I also did the same thing for the ponds, dredging of the ponds, and to make a long story short, I validated the $20,000 that James Sherrard is saying. I also questioned about the 16 hours it's going to take to bush hog each and every one of these ponds. You know, these ponds are all fairly small, you know, half an acre or less. And with the proper equipment, you can mow that in less than an hour. And so why it's going to take 16 hours is, you know, I'm having a hard time grasping that. And the inspection intervals. I don't think my pond, or our pond, is ever going to see 10 to 12 inspections a year. So, you know, I just urge someone to come up with some factual or some reasonable estimates. You know, factual might be kind of difficult to understand right now because we're trying to predict the future, but some reasonable, well thought out estimates instead of, you know, something that we're pulling out of textbooks. And I'd be happy to help. I'd be happy to share what I've done and, you know, show you where I'm coming from.
Thank you. That would be helpful to have you share that information.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other person for public comment? If not, then we'll go on to selection of an auditor for fiscal year 2017. Jennifer Kennelly has given us a memo to that effect, and perhaps you could briefly tell us a little bit, tell the listening audience what is in the memo and what your recommendation is.
So this was the year that we had to go out for an RFP for an audit. My original thought was to come to the select board and ask for an extension, a one-year extension, because I'm new to the town. There wouldn't be any need for, just to make sure that there wasn't any collusion between me and the auditor. And I asked A.M. Peisch to give us a quote, and their quote was double their price from last year. So I could not bring myself to come to you and ask you to do that. So I did the process of putting out an RFP and put together what we were looking for and how we were going to evaluate the proposals. I prepared a matrix that I shared with you of how I made my decision, scored each proposal that came in to me based on their audit approach, the budget, the qualifications, and the service we can expect from each firm. And I sent this out to 5 audit firms, looking at what different towns use around here, Essex, South Burlington, Burlington, and also posted it on our town website for firms to submit. Of the 5 that I sent out, 3 of those firms responded to me, and a 4th one came in from our website, from the website bid. So we received proposals from Sullivan & Powers, R.H.R. Smith, Fothergill, Segali & Valley, and Ron Bellevue and Company. And based on how I scored each firm, Fothergill, Segali & Valley came in with the most points on their approach, the qualifications and service. They scored the highest. And budget, they meet our budget expectations. They did not do better than our budget, and they weren't higher than our budget. And so it is my recommendation that the select board moves forward with selecting Fothergill, Segali & Valley to do our audit for the next, and I believe your notes there say for a 1-year term. We've actually asked them to do it for 3 years, is how they made their bid.
Standard contract procedure.
It is. It's good for the audit firm to get, it helps them recoup their costs from that first year of audit to do a 3-year bid process.
Thank you. Questions for Jennifer?
How many audits a year do they do?
How many audits does Fothergill see?
No, I mean, how many, I guess I don't understand the process. How
Town
many
audit.
audits do we have done a year?
The town audit is done once a year.
It's done once a year?
It's the financial audit, yes, is what we've requested them to do, yes.
That includes all the different funds, the town general fund, the sewer fund, the water fund, the stormwater fund, and if we have enough grants, they have to do a single audit for those grants programs as well.
That's what's meant by a single audit?
Yes.
A single thing, like a grant?
Yeah, if our grants total more than $750,000, they would have to do a single audit.
So is the audit cost then per year, $22,000 a year? No kidding, it's that much.
Yep.
Welcome to local government.
thought that might be for the, that's why I was confused about the 3,000. I
No,
thought that might be,
No, that's the single audit price if they just audit our grants received from the federal government, yes. It's a lot of money, yes.
Any further questions for Jennifer?
I think this is great, thank you, and you answered my one question. The only other thing I had is, if I remember correctly, Fothergill, Sagallon Valley was our, whatever, audit provider. Was it previous to AM Peach and Company?
AM Peisch, yes, they were.
Okay.
And we went out to bid 3 years ago, and in that process, selected AM Peisch to do our audit for 3 years. So it'd be switching back to Fothergill, Sagallon Valley, which is definitely one of the reasons that they thought we should select them too, is that they have history with Williston and they're familiar with how things work here in town. Yeah.
did you work up the selection criteria and the scoring?
I did, yes.
Pretty good.
Thank you.
Pretty thorough.
Any further questions? The motion would be in order then.
I move to approve the budget proposed, I move to select Fothergill, Sagallon Valley to conduct an audit of the town's finances for the fiscal years 2017 through 2019.
Yes.
Appropriate.
Is that right?
Yes.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And there's no abstentions. So as long as you're here and we have some time, perhaps you would wish to do the finance report, which is included in the manager's report.
Great, yes, so this is the period 10 of the fiscal year. It's hard to believe. We're 83% of the way through the fiscal year. Property taxes have all been billed, collected. We've done our final true-up with the state for any of the late adjustments that we needed to make for property or homestead declarations. We made an adjustment for those. So what you see on your report is how property taxes came in for the year. We did receive local options tax this afternoon. I believe Rick printed that out for you and shared that. You can see that local options tax, sales tax revenue is down a little bit from where we expected it to be. We, just based on each quarter, I think we thought it was going to come in around $520,000 this quarter, or $520,000 this quarter, and it came in at about $515,000. But rooms and meals tax is up a little bit from our expectations. Still planning to end the year a little ahead in the local options tax area. Planning and zoning revenues continue to exceed annual budget. There's lots of planning and projects going on. And our final state aid payments have been received for the highway department, so they are meeting their revenue budgets for the year. Expenses, we're continuing to see police department underspending in their budget. Main source of this is personnel-related expenses. The highway department is anticipating that the emergency expenses needed for the Marshall Ave Bridge will be covered within their current year's budget. Well, it is not what we didn't budget to spend this emergency amount, but savings in other areas of their budget, or underspending in other areas of their budget.
Since that's a significant cost, do you know what the Public Works Department's, Bruce's plan is? What won't get done because we'll have to put in the temporary bridge?
And I believe I misspoke. I said it would be covered under highway, and it will not be.
Okay.
The highway department will not be able to absorb this by themselves, but underspending in other departments.
Okay, so it's a net
would-
underspending.
Yes, for the town. My apologies for that.
Is there anything significant is there anything that you think is worthwhile letting us know that won't happen in another department because of this, or? Okay.
It's nothing that won't happen. It's, some of this underspending that we've been talking about in the police department will cover some of that. We don't have the official costs on that. Bruce is still waiting to hear of what that will be.
The Marshall Avenue is just a temporary bridge that we're talking about at this point, because we don't know what the actual cost is going to be to total repair.
The permanent fix, no, I think that's going to be a while before we have a number on what that will look like.
Sure. Okay. And so we have no idea what that cost will be. Will that likely be a capital budget item versus a?
It will not, because it's temporary.
I realized it's bridge.
Permanent bridge.
I meant
the permanent.
The permanent fix to the road.
Yes. Will be a capital improvement, yes.
I don't know how we're going to pay for it yet until we find out what it's going to cost, then we can figure out how we're going to pay for it.
Okay.
Any further questions for Jennifer?
Just a question on the options tax, there's no apparent trend. I mean, do we still feel bullish about the long-term retail prospects, given the news of things constantly closing, like EMS just recently, or?
I wouldn't say we feel bullish. In fact, when we prepared the budget, we didn't feel bullish. We felt that the rooms and meals were going to continue to increase or stay about the same. And we've been under budgeting for that revenue, so we increased that amount. On the sales tax, I think we essentially assumed level receipts on that. And it remains to be seen. If we head into a recession, you're going to see the receipts go down, and significantly. I mean, that's a significant part of our budget. So it could be couple $100,000 difference.
What was the dip in 2008, just percentage-wise? Or 2009, whatever we actually experienced it?
8 and 9, both.
Recession.
It's not, you don't have to look at it, I'm just.
Yeah, I was just looking to see if it was on the chart, and it's not. We can provide that to you next time.
I voted to try to kill off the fireworks.
Yes.
You really
Remember that.
patriotic, I tell you.
Almost got
We cut our salaries.
blasphemy.
Turning lights off all over town, we can't have that. No, eat your vegetables.
Cut our salaries
I was
as
to
well.
eat your vegetables. I did. I voted to cut our salaries by
Yes.
50%. And the fireworks.
Yeah. It took me years to get over that one.
We did reduce the number of streetlights.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, that's right.
That's still
Back, right?
Any further questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
So we'll move on to the Chittenden Solid Waste District budget report, and we do have Sarah Reeves, who is the general manager, and our representative, Craig Abrams, to be here tonight, and please give us the good news.
Yes, thank you for meeting me here this evening. I want to be able to, very happy to tell you that the financial outlook for the district does remain strong. I'm equally happy to be able to say that there is yet again, no member assessment for the district. I believe that maybe make it 19 years running. There's also not going to be any increase to the solid waste management fee, nor will there be any increases to the materials recovery fee, tipping fee at the material recovery facility. So the good news there is that we do have sufficient solid waste management fees, again, in that reserve fund, so that there will not need to be an increase for this year. We also will be drawing down out of that reserve fund this year, but it will still be a balance of just about $650,000 or $660,000 in that stabilization fund. So we're quite hopeful that we will also not have to raise the solid waste management fee in fiscal 19. So it looks like instead of getting just 4 years out of that fee from a couple of years ago, we should be able to get 5. Hopeful to get 6, but I cannot guarantee a 6th year, but we'll do our best. We are anticipating operating revenues in the proposed budget of $11,282,932. We are anticipating operating expenditures of $10,525,152, which leaves us with net revenues over expenditures of just over $750,000. And as I mentioned, we are going to transfer $370,000 from the rate stabilization fund to balance those needs as well. Some of the other fees that I want to highlight for you, we are going to be increasing 2 and decreasing 1. The 2 that we are increasing, actually, I'm sorry, the 3 will be increasing. 3? 1 is at Green Mountain Compost. So the thought there is that we wanted to try to kind of normalize our position in the market. We realized that we were most likely undercharging. Our tipping fee was $45 a ton. The market rate is somewhere between $50 and $60 a ton, both in the region and within the state. So we are proposing raising the tipping fee at Green Mountain Compost to $52 a ton effective July 1. We are also proposing implementing not a tip fee, a fee on food scraps only at our drop-off centers of $1.50 per bucket. And that would be for our customers who only use the drop-off center, just for food scraps. If they're also bringing us trash and recycling and food scraps, the cost of the food scraps is still embedded and incorporated into the trash fee. But if you're only using our drop-off centers solely for the food scraps, there will now be $1.50 per bucket fee. And that is, again, to really show the true cost of managing the solid waste. Now there's not a fee attached to that, so folks assume that the service is free. And as we know, collection services are certainly not free. So it is an attempt to recoup the cost of those services from the customers who are not also using the trash and recycling services.
It's okay if I interrupt? Is that a good way to do this? Because I worry if I don't, I'll forget.
Well, I'm not going to go too much longer, so
Okay.
I'll get through the fees, and
Okay.
actually, I only have maybe about a minute and a half, so
Okay.
plenty of time for questions. The one fee that will be going down is for our biosolids customers. We broker biosolids for several member communities, and actually, that management fee will be going down slightly. That is because we are anticipating not needing to spend a significant amount of staff time on that this coming year as we did this year. This year, we were working with the City of Burlington on a plan to potentially improve their facilities. They've decided to go a different route, so we will not be spending as much staff time there, so that fee will be going down. And the one last fee that we did implement this year, which will be continuing into next year, is at our environmental depot. And it is not a fee for residential users, but rather a fee on larger generators, commercial businesses. And in essence, it is to, again, be able to recoup some of the staff time. Sometimes when our businesses bring us materials, they may bring us 355-gallon drums, and that's relatively easy to manage when they bring us 2 boxes of 200 vials. Each vial has to be tested, and that takes up a lot of staff time. So it's an attempt to, again, recoup some of the staff time that is involved with dealing with some of these commercial industrial materials, and to also encourage those businesses to look for other ways to manage their waste, which they do have other options. So those are the highlights, the financial highlights, and a rundown of the changes in the fees for this year.
Thank you. Jack, a question?
Sure. Well, I guess my first question is I'm on section 1, page 1, section 1A, page 1. And and first of all, thank you. And my comments, I'm going to support the budget, but I do have questions, and I do want to make sure I understand. So please take my questions sometimes on the devil's advocate side of things in that vein. So the solid waste management fees, you show that there is a no change between fiscal year 17 and fiscal year 18. But you said you anticipate handling more materials. So more materials would tell me the amount of revenue coming in for the management fee should increase. So am I missing something?
So the management fee is the fee charged on tons disposed. Right. So we're actually anticipating a leveling or a similar number of tons disposed this year next year as opposed to this year. So we kept that number the same. The general trend has been to budget downward and to come in high. I actually asked our team this year to give me a more realistic budget. So because in looking at the trends as far as the solid waste, the trash disposed, It isn't going down as precipitously as maybe we would hope or would like. It is somewhat leveling off. So it's an attempt to be a little bit more realistic in the anticipation of the revenues. So as far as materials, additional materials being handled, that is reflected in the household hazardous waste budget. It's reflected in the material recovery facility budget, the drop-off center for special wastes, things like bulky plastics and clean wood, things of that nature. So those are where we're anticipating, and biosolids, actually, sludges, looking to have those increase.
Okay. I'm moving down further when you talk about the net revenues to, from or to reserves, and the one called capital reserves. There's a significant increase from the past 2 years to this year, almost 50%. So I'm just trying to understand, I mean, I understand you're putting money away for capital projects, and you talk a little bit about it, but that's a significant increase.
It is, and we are looking very strongly and closely at the near-term capital needs, particularly in infrastructure. And so one of the things that we're looking at trying to boost and make some real decisions on, first are our drop-off centers. We know, for example, that Heinsberg is going to need, has approved a new public works in our drop-off centers. So we have, so there's going to be a significant infrastructure. And we need to look at some things that we need to do there. So as far as the money that we're trying to basically put a little bit more money into those accounts, particularly for the MRF, because we know we're not going to do that project this year, but probably in 2 or 3 years is where we're going to need to spend that capital out of that.
So the concept is building up reserves, so when that happens, I don't know if you bond, if that's something you do, but it would lessen the amount if you need
correct.
to. Okay.
Correct. We like to pay cash, or at least where we can. We're trying to not have to bond, but that may come down the road.
Okay. And getting back to the $1.50 per bucket, and I'm a faithful user of the drop-off center. I'm a big fan of the drop-off center. I compost, so we don't bring compost. But if I remember correctly, it's not required yet that residents compost. So my comment is along the lines of similar to recyclables, where you want to attract people to bring or separate out recyclables and bring them. If you want to attract folks to separate out their food waste and bring them to you, is charging $1.50 per bucket more of a disincentive as opposed to it is forcing people to recognize that there is a cost associated with this, and we're trying to recoup at least a portion of it by charging this fee? I just worry if that might backfire on you. On the other hand, I don't know how much you collect at your drop-off centers, and if it really is a drop in the bucket compared to all the other mechanisms that organic waste ends up, wherever it ends up.
Yeah, it is a risk. You're exactly right. And that was, I think, part of the decision when the decision was made a couple of years ago to embed the price in the cost of the trash and the recycling, and to keep, essentially the fee free. And you're right, that 2020 is the deadline for residents to keep organics out of the landfill. They actually don't have to compost. That will be a choice, so it can be a couple of different ways that they can manage their organic scraps. But you're right, it is a risk, and it's something that we know that we wanted to try to, again, get at the cost, making them visible. And we also heard from our haulers who, until a few weeks ago, were expected to begin offering collection for organics beginning July 1st. That has now been moved to 2018 from 2017, so they are now not required, but some haulers have already made the investment. So they will be offering and have offered some of their customers this service. So, we realize that we really shouldn't necessarily be in competition with the haulers for that service. So one way that we could do that was to make that fee visible and to let our customers know that, yes, there is a cost associated with managing this material.
Okay, that's...
Any other questions? So the $1.50 per bucket, is that the usual bucket that people get, or is it a 5-gallon can, or?
You're the fourth town to ask this question, so you are right on top of it. And actually, that has not yet been decided, because the way that I think it was discussed at the board level was for a 5-gallon bucket. Well, a 5-gallon bucket, that's a lot of scraps, which is a great value for your $1.50, by the way, but that's a lot. It would take a fairly long time, I think, even for, the most ardent of us to fill that 5-gallon bucket. So it could be something where we need to go back to the staff, and actually staff and I were going to talk about this tomorrow, and go back to the board and say, maybe we need more of a sliding scale or 2 tiers. So kind of the kitchen counter bucket, maybe that's $1. A larger bucket, maybe that's the $1.50. So right now, it's almost a placeholder to figure it out a little bit. We just wanted to kind of send that signal, get that into the budget to, reflect the actuality. But as far as the size, you're exactly right. We need to figure that out. So I think that may be shifting a little bit, but we will let everyone know for sure.
Probably self-regulating it. I don't know if anybody's going to want to keep.
Yeah, particularly July and August, yeah. It's a little easier if you can freeze your food scraps, but yeah, true.
Good, thanks. Any further questions?
Just a comment, Craig, thank you for
Yes.
being here and for your service. Your reports show that you are very involved and dedicated and thorough, and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Ted.
Volunteer?
Yes.
Oh,
A board appointee. so
Board
yes.
appointee.
okay,
Yes.
great.
Well, thank you. And we need,
Spy.
How many years?
6 or 7, I think.
Thank you. Yeah,
welcome.
agreed, ditto.
we're still looking for an alternate too. We probably are as well, so, yeah. But thank you.
Can I ask the staff a question on this? It's a dumb question, but why do we approve the budget?
Actually,
See
that
the
goes better
CSWD?
to.
That's the
Oh,
stuff.
maybe,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's part of our statute, it's part of our charter. It's in law that the member communities must approve the budget. Now, you don't necessarily have to vote to approve, but you have 45 days from when our board approves it, which was April 26th, to either approve or to essentially let it pass without approval. But it's part of the charter.
You're a municipal corporation.
We are a municipal corporation, correct?
Same legal entity that Williston is.
Yes.
Which is why they can bond and things like that.
Didn't really realize how that was all constructed, so. Okay.
So there is a motion proposed, if someone would wish to make it.
I've moved to approve the budget proposed for fiscal year 2018 by the Chittenden Solid Waste District.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good, then we'll move on to the host town agreement, supplement number 6, and so since you're right there,
Very good.
we can, perhaps you and Rick both want to comment on this?
The supplement number 6 is essentially a payment in lieu of taxes for parcel B, which is the land that is reserved for future landfill use, which, again, we are not planning on building a landfill in the foreseeable future. So this is, in essence, a pilot agreement. And I know Rick had reviewed the document after there were some questions, verified the assessment, verified the numbers. I believe everything is in order, but I would turn that to Rick to verify.
Right, yeah, everything's in order. There was a question on the wording, and it says the district shall pay to the town an amount equal to the product of 33,710 multiplied times the tax rate. And that yields a payment of about $9,000, which is what we receive.
Right.
That 33,710, though, represents a property value of $3,371,000, and that's
Right.
where the confusion is coming in.
So this is a nit, and I won't disagree, I'll approve it, but the tax rate's actually a rate. It's a rate per thousand, or, I'm sorry, per hundred, it's per hundred. So when, the tax rates are published, and they're published as, I don't know if the our finance person wants to comment, but they're published as a rate per 100, so when homeowner looks in there, it's a rate per 100. So when you multiply it times 33,710, you say, well, oh, that's, so you're kind of applying the number in two different ways. It really should have just shown the $3.3 million in there instead of the 33,000, but.
Actually, it's a point well taken.
Good pickup, as long as we get the right amount.
Yeah, as long as we, yeah.
In the very first paragraph, there need to be a date change there, the January 21st, or January 2017. Second line.
Yeah, well, that's the type of thing we can change.
Yeah.
after.
Right, yes, for
As long
sure.
as it isn't substantive.
So any questions regarding the proposed supplement number 6? A motion would be in order.
Move to authorize the manager to sign supplement number 6 to the host town agreement between the town of Chittenden, the town and Chittenden Solid Waste District.
Second.
So any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much for coming tonight. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, appreciate your time.
Welcome, Terry.
So we're not quite ready for the comprehensive plan review yet. Since people are coming from next door. So let's go on to resolution and certificate for bond, item number 8. And Rick, you probably would want to talk about that.
Well, since our finance director's here, I'll let her do it.
Okay.
This is just a revised resolution. The board had already approved the resolution, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, I'm sorry. They approved the resolution. It's for the sewer project, a Route 2A sewer project. The cost of that project has increased. That's been approved by the agencies that needed to approve it, and now this is just a new resolution from the bank with the new value in there.
As I state in my memo, that this is to arrange for the permanent financing of this final piece of the $1.5 million bond issue that was approved in March 2011. The other pieces have been in place and permanently financed.
This is just one of those things that we do on occasion and just a formality.
That was exactly going to be my question. This is just a formality, correct?
Yes, at this point, the board has already approved the bond. This is just the final documentation.
Do you have the paperwork for them to sign?
What's in this packet?
I thought I had it.
Oh, to actually sign.
Well,
If there's not a sign, if there's not a copy, I can go.
Copy here, if that.
well, that's not the whole thing.
Not the
Well,
whole-
well, that's the piece that's selected.
Do I have it in my
that's right.
briefcase? Yeah.
No, I don't think you do. I can print out the full
Sign these before the end of the night.
copy and bring up, because we just need one signed copy. And then Deb will approve that tomorrow, and we'll get it off to the bond bank.
So we do need a motion on this resolution.
Move to adopt the resolution and certificate for the borrowing of $267,392 from the Vermont State Revolving Loan Fund.
Second.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, then all of us in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And no abstentions? All right, then that one is done. Thank you very much. And we move on to item number 9, on the Regional Stormwater Program. And Rick, you have a write-up on this one as well.
Sure. Back in 2004, the town joined with a number of other communities to set up 2 regional programs. And these programs were used to satisfy requirements that were under the town's MS4 permit. And one dealt with public education and outreach, and the other with public involvement and participation. And over time, those groups have performed well, but the feeling was that their mission was so similar that it made sense to merge. So they've worked hard to develop a memorandum of understanding that would merge the two groups. The fees that we pay are not changing. They're going to remain identical. And so staff's recommending that the agreements be approved.
So are there questions for Rick on this proposal?
Do we get anything out of this, Rick? Did we use anything out of this? I couldn't really figure out what it was for. I read the memo and didn't,
Right.
public outreach and, you know, what does that mean for this?
Yeah, and I should have gotten some additional information on that, because they do a number of different program activities, including they pay for ads and the media as part of the public education and outreach. They've run programs where they do stenciling of storm drains. I don't have the complete list at my fingertips, though. But it's, like I said, it's been an ongoing program, and so it's done at a regional level, rather than the town trying to do these things and all the advertising on its own. It made sense to kind of pool our efforts.
So that's who stencils the storm drains telling you not to dump? It's not the town?
It depends. I'd have to check. I don't know specifically that was part of the regional program or the local program, or both. You know, we may have done some, and it may have been some regional. Over time, things have changed.
At one point, there was an Eagle Scout project to do that for at least one of the developments, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But kind of the point is, or my takeaway from this is, our permit requires it, or the permit requires us to do something.
Yes.
And this is whether we agree with it, we like it, we think it's effective or not, it's a requirement of the permit. And if we don't have the permit, you know, there's huge liabilities to that. This is the most cost-effective way to meet the requirements of the permit, you know.
This satisfies the requirements. That's correct.
What we should do, though, is make sure that James, as our rep, you know,
Yes, he is.
gets us something out of that, right? Gets us, make sure we get our, whatever, $5,500 worth of stuff out of it.
Yes. He is our
Because-
representative.
Yeah, so,
And if you want, I can get you a list of some, because I hadn't thought of that, but
just to make sure we get, you
well,
know,
it'll be interesting, I think, for you to see the different things.
yeah.
There's a bit of information on page 4 of the Public Education and Outreach Operating Programs website, smartwaterways.org, advertising in various media, hosting and organizing workshops, projects, and other events. I myself have not gone to any of their workshops, projects, or events, but they're there.
I'm sure they have cookies.
I'm looking for something kid-friendly.
You may or may not remember that we reviewed the proposed bylaw changes to the CCRPC, and part of it was to create the Clean Water Advisory Committee, which is mentioned in James's memo that now is helping to coordinate all of this as well. So if we're ready to do anything with this, a motion is in order.
Move to authorize the manager to sign the Chittenden County MS4 Stormwater Program Agreement.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, then all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And no abstentions? So let's do the manager's report.
Well, I don't have much this evening. My written report is short, and my verbal report will be shorter. The only thing I wanted to add to the written report is that the construction on the water tank, the new water tank off of Mount View Road, as I understand it, has started.
Yes?
So I haven't been by there to see it myself, but I understand that.
Yeah, I've been wondering what those guys were.
That's the Munson crew.
I thought it was a spy thing.
They're starting the construction of the access road that'll go up to the top of the hill. You know, the tank will go up to the top.
Is it a tank on poles or just a flat on the ground thing?
Most of the tank will be underground. There will be some showing, though, but I don't remember how.
Cast-in-place concrete, if I remember
I
correctly.
think so, yeah. And this is a project that's being done by the Water District. and paid for in part by the town and in part by the water district.
When does the old tank come down? That I want to see.
It will eventually come down, but I'm sure it won't come down until well after the new tank is in place.
Yeah. I know I've said this before, we seem to have plenty of time to kill, so I hope you don't mind. I'm going to miss that old water tank. I love that tank. You know, that's just a bygone era. You know, those big tanks up on those stilty legs that high school kids would figure out a way to climb up and put graffiti on. I mean, that just defines.
Well, people will wonder in the future why they call the road Tower Lane.
Yeah, right, they would.
Although, actually, there may still be some sort of communications tower there. It won't be anywhere near as big or as imposing as the water tank, but.
Yeah, it's that classic. What do they name the road? Well, whatever the development that, you know, took away. Yeah.
So that's why I had to see it.
So, well, let's talk about any other business that we need to talk about tonight, before we recess and wait for the planning commission and Ken Belleville to come.
One quick thing. Rick, I saw the email you sent to Joy Peterson regarding chickens. And it led to the question of, I know there are certain ordinances we can't act on until our town plan has been adopted. But what ordinances are those? I was just trying to.
Only the development bylaws.
And the chickens would be in a development.
It's a zoning related.
Okay.
But yeah, other ordinances could be adjusted, but
Yeah.
anything relating to the bylaws
Okay.
cannot.
Okay.
Could you look at the chicken ordinance for South Burlington?
No.
Yeah,
It's pretty good.
yeah.
It's written well, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So, yes, we are ready to go with the comprehensive plan review. If there's no other business, we can move directly to the comprehensive plan review. Ken Belleville and the planning commission are here to tell us about that and lead us through, I think, 3 different parts of it tonight.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
we're on perfect timing, so thanks.
The way it's supposed to be in television, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you, Terry. So with me tonight, I have 5 members of the Planning Commission are here with me. Starting on my far right, Paul Laska, and Jake Mathon, who is the chair, Kate Lamar, Ben King, and Megan Cope. So they're all here, and the town plan is, it's a result of work that's done by the Planning Commission. I know oftentimes people see the staff in the planning office as being the point person in the town plan, and it's not that we didn't have a role in it, but it really comes about as a result of a lot of work that's done by the members of the commission, interacting with the public and with some input from staff as well. So that's just by way of a little bit of backdrop. So all the members of the select board have been provided with a copy of the plan. I know I've given an overview at least twice. We've had conversations going back a couple of years ago when we first started the process. We spent some time during the select board retreat back in August talking about some of the things in the plan. So I know for you, Terry, you're relatively new on the board, so you're on the steep part of the learning curve. But there has been some presentations about some of the material in the plan in time. So not everything, hopefully, will be feel like it's brand new. Within the scope of the presentation for tonight, really want to do a couple of things. First of all, in the front part of the plan, one of our objectives in this plan was to update a lot of the demographic data that we had in the plan that we did back in 2011. And again, this information isn't really new. It's been presented a couple of times before. But we really the demographic data, I think, illustrate a couple of things. Number one, Williston is a fast-growing community, and that's not really a new thing. It's been going on for, at least a half a century. And the growth rate has been higher during some decades than others. It goes up and it plateaus and then it goes up again. But it has been a long-term trend. And if we look back over the last decade, we see some of that longer-term trend replicate itself on a sort of a micro basis. Some years there's more growth than others, but when you look at, you review the end result from one decade to the next, say from 2000 to 2010, you see a picture of the town growing that's generally consistent with the long-term trend that the town has experienced.
Are you starting to go through the book?
I am.
What page are you on?
Page 5. So this would be chapter 2. So, I'm on table 2A.
On the right side, by the way.
The first couple of chapters don't have verses. That comes later on in the plan. So, and all those chapters should be tabbed. The one thing I will say is because of the first copies I ran, the way they were paginated, sometimes the tab doesn't line up neatly with the first page of the new chapter, but I know you'll be able to figure it out. But in this chapter, it should. So there's some graphs there on page 5 that show both the long-term trend for population growth as well as a table that kind of drills down and not only shows you the trend here in Williston, but how it compares both to the average for the county, Chittenden County, as well as to the state. And, you know, so both in the relatively short-term past and the long-term past, Williston's growth really sort of stands out as being different in some ways than certainly than the state as a whole, and even within Chittenden County. And Chittenden County is the fastest growing county. I shouldn't say the fastest growing, but it's the county in the state that is the growth engine for the state of Vermont. If we flip over to page 6, we also looked at, as required by statute, what do the people that read the tea leaves say about the future for Williston. And it really does appear that population growth will continue. The state did these two contrasting estimates a few years ago, and one was sort of a high growth scenario and one was a slow growth scenario. And depending upon which of those scenarios played out, in the slow growth, the population of the state of Vermont would decline. And the population of Chittenden County would increase only slightly. And if you look at table 2.C, and this would be on page 6, so you see the way it plays out in Williston, there is some variation depending upon which scenario you follow, but in either one you see the population continuing to increase. So based on what we know about past trends and sort of projecting those forward into the future, we would anticipate that there would continue to be growth pressures on Williston. And that's been a big theme of what the town plans have been trying to do for at least a couple of decades, is understanding that dynamic. This is where we are in the county. This is what's playing out, and hence these are some of the issues that we have to try to address and tackle within the context of the plan.
So Ken, is it okay if I interrupt?
Please.
Okay. So as these projections are made into what Williston will look like in 2020 and 2030, how are those estimates made? And what I mean by that is there are a whole bunch of things that could happen in Williston that could restrict growth. There could be moratoriums on housing. There could be, I'm being totally facetious here, but our schools could get a very bad reputation. I don't know, maybe the select board gets a really bad reputation and nobody wants to move here. How can those projections look forward to those restrictions that will be there, or can they? Does that question make sense?
Sure, and projections are a type of modeling, And with any type of modeling, and we do a lot of modeling in the transportation world, you always have to make assumptions. And so, usually you start with, you say, well, how have things been playing out in the past? You want to have some sort of assessment of, does it seem like there is the potential for those past trends to continue into the future? But you're right, there could be any number of things, either individually or collectively, that could change that trajectory dramatically. We spend a lot of time talking about, wastewater. There was a time in the past where
Good point, I forgot. I should have mentioned wastewater.
I'm here for you, Jeff. So there was a time in the past where it didn't look like the town would have any significant capacity going forward. And that's sort of changed for a variety of reasons. So that's an example of certainly of a constraint, but also an example of how things can change. And will there be some change that we don't really know about at this point in time? Absolutely. But there are a lot of factors that play out, and so you could have factors that would weigh in different directions. They could cancel each other out in terms of their magnitude. But at least what we see today, I guess the big point that I would make is the continuation of both the recent and the long-term trend, which is that where growth is occurring in Vermont, it's occurring in Chittenden County, and where growth is occurring in Chittenden County, it's being felt most in a small number of communities. That includes Williston. And so that's my takeaway from it.
The note I'm writing down is based on Ken's crystal ball.
I'm reporting somebody else's crystal ball.
Okay.
And so, we're talking about population growth. On page 6 at the bottom there, we also have a graph where we've charted out. This is employment as it's covered by, I think this is covered by, it's called covered employment. I think it's employees subject to paying income taxes, and this is reported by the state. And so you see and this is over like a 35-year increment of time. It's reported in 5-year increments. So there is a little bit of lumpiness. It's kind of fits and starts depending upon where you are in the business cycle. But nonetheless, there is a long-term growth trend. And so if we look back over the last, say, 15 years, if we were to measure, the difference between 2005 and 2010, we had a recession, and so you saw employment go down. But we've recovered some of those employment losses from the recession of the late 2000s, and employment now is higher than it was 2000 or 2005. So the long-term trend, is still there, at least for the time being. One of the other things that we spent some time documenting is talking about the aging population. And this is something that is not just particular to Williston. It's playing itself not only across the country, but across the world, the developed world. Lots of countries, whether it's Japan or in Europe with advanced economies, have aging populations. It's being felt particularly in northern New England. So as measured by median age, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine are the 3 oldest states in the country. And when we compare the data, the aging data for Williston to the state as a whole, as measured by median age, we're older than the state of Vermont as a whole. So again, an issue that's playing out on a large stage, that's also playing out particularly here in Williston. So that affects lots of things in the plan. One of the things, for example, that we would anticipate as a result of that is we don't currently have pressure on the facilities for our schools. We would expect that would continue. with an aging population, the number of school-age children, it may be roughly flat to slightly decline, but there's headroom in the schools, so on that score, we're in relatively good shape. At least for the foreseeable future, it seems unlikely that we need to build another school or build the second half of the clamshell at the Allenbrook School. That's just one way in which that demographic trend could manifest itself. One of the other things that we see that goes on, is happening alongside of that is household sizes are declining. They're getting smaller. And we're certainly seeing that, in terms of what it is that people are building, we're seeing more and more smaller housing units that are being built. There was a period of time where the dominant housing type in Williston that was being built was a 3 or 4 bedroom neo-colonial on a 1/2 to 3/4 acre lot. And that's not the most prevalent housing type that's being built today. There still are some of those that are being built, but we're seeing smaller units for a whole number of reasons, but part of which is that household sizes are declining. And so that's really is kind of the front end of the plan in terms of some of the demographic changes. There was some other data, in particular regarding housing, that we did update as well, and I would suggest that we could cover that when we cover the chapter on housing and growth management, which would be later in the process. Terry, you look like you have a question.
Excuse me, I was kind of wondering what your job is with respect to managing growth. In other words, do we want growth or don't want growth? Or I know you moderate growth by offering a certain number of building permits, but from a town perspective, I mean, do we motivate growth or we're the fastest growing community in Chittenden County, right?
One of the fastest.
And the question is do we promote that? I mean, is that something we promote, or is that something we just allow to happen as a result of our policies?
Terry, do you mean residential growth or residential and commercial?
I guess I meant residential.
So what I would say is one of the themes of the plan, and this is not a new theme, but it's a continuation of the town plan we have in effect now, and you could go back 20 years of town plans. And the way I would express it is that the town has experienced a lot of growth pressure, and that's an issue that's there. And the town has to figure out one way or the other how it wants to manage it. So the town has developed some strategies, some policies, and used some techniques over that period of time. But certainly one of the major themes has been, okay, so here we are, 6 miles as the crow flies from Lake Champlain. We've got an interchange on Interstate 89. We're 2 or 3 miles from the airport, depending on how you want to measure it. We have a highly rated school system. There are a lot of things about this community that are attractive. How do we want to manage that stuff? There are some policies that are embedded in the town plan today, some of which are recommended that they would continue in the new town plan. Some of those include we limit new growth and development, not just the pace, but where it can occur. There's limited municipal water and sewer service, for example. It's not provided across the whole swath of the town. It's provided in limited areas. That has a braking or effect on where growth can occur, and so also on the pace of growth. You've also alluded to some of the aspects of our growth management system, and there are some numeric caps that are built into all of our regulations. So those still exist within our plan today. They are recommended to continue in the new plan, and we're kind of getting ahead a little bit, but one of the things that the Planning Commission has been discussing, and there's been some discussions with the Select Board prior to your arriving, is what sort of changes, if any, does the town want to make to the current growth management system? So I throw that out as a question, not necessarily as an answer. So I think your question is a good one, and it goes to the heart of the plan, which is that we're a community that's experiencing growth pressure as a town. We need to make some decisions about what we want to do about that. And as part of that, taking a look at what kinds of tools, techniques, or strategies the town would want to employ to try to manage that growth.
I guess I was making a face probably because I was trying to think about philosophically, when you allow growth, you allow people to sell their property, make money, and clearly we don't want to impede people from using their at least that wouldn't be, I don't think, an intention, right? Just like the small homeowner, or the small property, or the small subdivision, right? You want to allow that in some way. On the other hand, we have this huge growth, and there are times when traffic backs up on Williston Road here in the middle of the village, or on Mountain View, or now we're talking about North Williston Road, I guess, gets pretty bad as well. So and the quality of life goes down for those people in those places with all the traffic. So I'm just wondering, how do you balance the growth?
And don't forget that affordable housing as well, because the more you restrict growth, the more the cost of housing and the cost of development goes up. So again, a third thing to try to juggle and balance. Believe me, we struggle with it, and we've got quite a road ahead of us too. And we're going to try to work with you to take some of our direction as to where the select board, as the elected officials, and really the voice of the town, where you kind of want us to go with it. So,
and affordable housing is one of the things I studied a bit in the past before I came here, just because I volunteer in various, homeless and areas, and it's such a Williston's so popular for building. One of the questions I asked is, why haven't we done the kind of zoning that forces affordable housing? In other words, we're not going to allow 80 units of colonial size, or even the smaller ones, where we want half of those units to be affordable. I mean, would we really not see growth as a result of that? What do you call that? Inclusionary zoning. But anyway, I'm probably getting way ahead of, I know builders don't like that.
In the past, so those ideas have been talked about in the past. And in the time that I've been here, in the last 9 years, when we've had those discussions, the consensus has been that the town has stopped short of going to mandating inclusionary zoning. So the policy decisions have been that we would try to develop some incentives that would hopefully encourage and support developers building more affordable units, whether you call them affordable or worker housing, or just housing across a variety of price points. There's different words you can use for it, but that the town has stopped short of literally mandating a certain required number or percentage of units having to be built within a certain price point.
I understand, right? So.
I have a question for the select board. I know that the Williston Housing Task Force had brought a proposal to the select board for review, and had a statute that was proposed and some discussion as far as funding. I just wanted to find out if that's something that the select board is still continuing to pursue, or what the status of that is in relation to the discussion about affordable housing.
So the proposal was that we have an ordinance, I believe, on that, and we've, at one of our meetings recently, we asked to have a public hearing warned for that very topic. So that should be coming up soon.
I guess the other part I would also add is I'll look to see how this document turns out, because if inclusionary zoning is I mentioned in here, identified in here, that certainly gives credence to why we might want to pursue inclusionary zoning. On the other hand, if it's evaluated and is determined that, I don't know what the right words are, it isn't as effective, there's more liabilities and there's benefits, whatever, then I'll take that as a strong clue about maybe why it isn't a good idea to pursue inclusionary zoning.
It was in the housing, one of the two reports that we saw from the
Yep.
group that went off and did the special report on affordable housing, and I think it was recommended in the report, but not pursued. And the reason was because Burlington did some study, but Burlington's a completely different situation than Williston. Burlington's an old town that requires redevelopment rather than new development. And from what I've studied, and again, I'm no expert on it, but across the country, redevelopment areas are much harder to build affordable housing in than new development areas. And we have the most attractive property in the county, so I just wonder why we haven't pursued it more. But I guess that's something we have to talk about.
Well, so 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we did the town plan, there was a discussion about this issue, and the consensus of the commission and the select board was, again, we stopped short of inclusionary zoning. That was not different from the town plan that was before that. The Affordable Housing Task Force, which met, I don't remember how many years ago it was, but that was also the consensus of that group as well. And so there were some housing target numbers that were included in that report. There was some discussion about that as a possible tool, but the recommendation was to stop short of inclusionary zoning. So that has been the history. Whether that should still be the policy as we move forward is another question, but that's really has been the history, is when we've looked at it, that has been the consensus of whether it's the recommending body or in terms of the select board, the decisions that have been made.
You're right, it was one of the options listed, not a but it wasn't recommended. The trust fund was recommended ahead of it.
By the way, the public hearing on the ordinance is scheduled for June 20th at 7:30 PM.
June what?
20th,
20.
7:30 PM.
Was it, Ken, just to be clear about this, there was a task force that just concluded at the beginning of this year after sitting for almost a year. And at this particular time, I'm not clear as to the position that was taken as far as inclusionary zoning was concerned. I don't know I know it was certainly discussed. I know that Jeff was part of the committee, and certainly, I don't know if we had come to the conclusion that we were stopping just short of it, but I certainly thought we were looking at as many different options as we possibly could to move forward with it.
If I remember correctly, there are two things that I remember about the report, but my faulty memory. One is that it had very aggressive goals in it in terms of affordable housing, seeing affordable housing occur or be built in Williston. It did not go so far as to recommend inclusionary zoning. One of the things I would hope the select board would do, or maybe through the town plan, would be evaluation of those goals, whether those goals still make sense. If they still make sense, we'll look at the progress we're making. And if the goals still make sense, we're not making good progress, then maybe that is time to reevaluate some of the more aggressive mechanisms, in this case, to force affordable housing. The one thing I will say is I want to make sure, as I hear stories about Burlington, I know Williston's different than Burlington, I want to try to make sure I understand as much as possible what are the liabilities of inclusionary zoning. I think I got a good sense of the benefits, if you will, at least in terms of affordable housing. I want to make sure I understand the liabilities too.
I imagine you could slow down growth, but I'm not sure that's a huge liability for us, but there probably are other things. But to me, it seems like it does multiple things, right? It could reduce traffic if you put it in the right place, if you put it near where the jobs are.
So if I may make an observation, we're in the introductory section of the plan. We've got a bit into the weeds. This is a very good, we should not forget this discussion, but it really should happen during the housing section.
Final footnote on that, was actually looking ahead, and section 5.2.2 does talk about how the policy will allow for the consideration of inclusionary zoning if other things don't work. But I don't want to go on that.
So we'll be discussing that.
So, right, so that's sort of like one of the latter parts of what we wanted to do tonight, which was we wanted to not just give you a 5,000-foot overview, was to start to drill down a little bit. And in fact, when I was talking with the Planning Commission before we came over, we were sort of talking about trying to anticipate what we thought would be the important issues that would come from you folks. And I said, I really don't know yet. So you're providing an answer for that question tonight. But I guess I would ask if there's any more questions about sort of the front part of the document in terms of the demographic trends that we're seeing. And then there's language in the front part of the document that really talks about what I went over very briefly, which is that some of the themes of the plan of the town managing growth. There's also a lot of strategies, major strategies within the plan that are assumed that they would continue as we move forward. And those are all going to be documented as we go down chapter by chapter in the plan. One of which was just some of the things that I talked about relative to the land use plan.
The only other thing, based on the demographics of the aging population and fewer kids, has there been any consideration on accommodations for older people in the town and just the larger elderly population? We keep on hearing about a senior center, and quite frankly, I mean, if we're one of the only big communities that doesn't have one, maybe that's something. And I don't know if that's part of this or not. I didn't get that far in here.
So we did have some discussion as we were working on the plan, and we got some input from the public, especially early on, the whole notion of the community center. And this is a thing that it comes around almost like on a cycle. And I think what we talked about with the Planning Commission, and this is sort of, my 2 cents on, is I think that ultimately the town needs to decide where it wants to go with that. Like what a community center would look like, what would it include, what would it not include, where would it be located, and how are you going to pay for it. Now, it's really easy to state those questions. It's a lot more difficult to answer them. But clearly, it is something that comes around. A senior center or a facility or space for seniors to meet or seniors to do things in is clearly an important consideration in that. We also hear things like periodically people say, well, we should have a pool, and it should include this and it should include that. So those would all be questions that the town would have to think through and answer. The more things it includes, the more expensive it's likely to be. And so there's a budgetary consideration in all that, including how much do you want to spend if you do want to spend any money, and then how would you pay for it? And then related to that, where would it be located? So we do have, I think there's at least one item in here that talks about the community center. That would be an item that I think going forward would be one that would require some action on the part of the select board in terms of whether it means creating a task force, creating an advisory committee, but really trying to drill down and get some answers to some of those questions. Again, it's easy to state the questions. It's much more difficult to answer them. But I think it's certainly something that is worthwhile considering. We haven't seen so far so we're seeing an aging population, and it's not that you don't see it, but at least right now, the portion of the population that's older, there doesn't seem to be a huge swell of the population that is really asking for or needing a lot of intensive services. So we have an older population. They may still be in the workforce. They may not even be retired yet, or they may be newly retired. They're in sort of the easier part of that older part of the life cycle. Over time, I suspect that we will see that change as you know, we're all getting older every day, much to our chagrin. But I suspect that we'll likely see that change over time. I can't say in the planning office we've seen that, you know, in the present. We're not really actively involved in sort of senior programming per se, but that's just sort of my, you know, my anecdotal observation on that.
I just wanted to add too that, and we'll get to this later in specific chapters, but a lot of the town plan's goals actually serve older populations very well. Things like enhancing public transportation access, focusing more on smaller unit housing that's more densely located and is close to other kinds of services. Those are kind of infrastructure things that are much more conducive to older populations being able to age independently. And so in a lot of ways, they may help other households and types of families and individual single-person households as well. But in that way, those kinds of goals are really effective because they do address a lot of needs for older populations as well as others. But something to just consider as we go through other sections of this.
Any other questions or comments on the front part of the plan?
Question for you, how do you want us to handle typos to get them to you that we've discovered as we read along the booklet?
If we were able to get something in writing, that would be really good.
Email?
Email would be fine, or even you know, on the back of a paper napkin. But something written on a piece of paper is the best, whether digitally or, you know, or analog, would be great.
Good, okay.
Okay, so the other, part two of what we wanted to do tonight is trying to drill down into chapters, was we wanted to talk about economic development, which is chapter 7. And so the economic development chapter is a new chapter. As you'll see as we get into it, the things that are in it aren't necessarily new per se, but it is a new chapter. And the reason why there is a new chapter is that since the last town plan was done, the legislature, in its infinite wisdom, inserted an economic development element into the required elements for town plans. It did not necessarily have to be its own standalone chapter, but in discussing this with the Planning Commission, it was decided that, yeah, we'll put it all in one chapter. We'll make it really easy to find. But as you'll see, it really just pulls together a lot of things that we were already doing and that were already contained within the town plan from before. So in the first page of the economic development chapter, we have a repeat of some general information about, you know, job growth in Williston. And clearly, as you can see, over time, the number of jobs in Williston has grown, you know, significantly over the years. We also have some data in terms of employment distribution going across different types of land use categories, as well as areas in which we've seen either job gain or job loss. So kind of, you know, drilling down into what some of those categories are.
Are these the raw numbers that the pie charts are about, or is it?
I think that, so 7B and 7C, I believe one of those is supposed to be 2010. I just noticed that, Ted. So I think we've got a wrong title on that, and we'll have to address that to change
Under
it.
establishment and employment.
Oh, one's establishments, yes. Right.
The employment distribution, that's the percentage of people employed in town? There's
People.
People.
People, yes. And then the other's firms. And then when we go over to 7D and 7E, that's really talking about jobs, so people. So you see the areas in which there's expanded increasing number of workers in those areas, and then places where there are less. So what I'm also going to tell you is I understand that you're looking at the same thing I am. These are all in black and white. These are all really in color, and so we printed the text in black and white for a cost measure, but on all the information on the website, these are all generated in color. Ted, you've got the computer, so you're...
He's telling the truth.
Yeah, so please don't ask me about any questions about these shades of gray, because I won't be able to
50
read
shades?
them. So we also looked at some information as we go over to Table 7A. Again, some analysis of employment changes over time. We wanted to include information in the numbers that showed where we are today, also compared to where we were 5 years ago, and then compared to where we were 10 years ago, so we could see, you could sort of see how well we've come out of the trough of the recession that took place, you know, in the middle of the last decade. Sales tax receipts, which is a way of measuring retail trade, is an important aspect of the retail of the economy in general here in Williston. And what you see is that the amount of sales for taxable goods is less now than it was in 2005 in Williston. So we haven't really recovered all of the activity that we saw going back 10 years ago. We've certainly recovered some of what was lost during the recession. But it hasn't gone back to where it was before. That, I think, as much as anything, is a national thing having to do with, you know, how commerce is moving to e-commerce.
That's all true, but there's also,
Information that we got from the state on that score.
for example, is one example, and that Wilson, even though the state wasn't charging sales tax for clothing, they, in general, they were for dollar amounts under $110 or something, I think. So that's money that we lost, and that's just one example.
So there may be an apples to oranges element.
But the general trend, I think, is accurate.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to just make sure that we as a town are thinking ahead to the fact that retail, especially on-site retail, is really an industry that is going down. And there have been a bunch of reports, even in the past 2 weeks, about the major shifts in retail. I just recently read statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that 89,000, nationally, 89,000 retail workers have lost their jobs since just October, and 30,000 in the month of March alone. Again, national data, but I think it's something, because we are quite dependent on retail, particularly for our tax base, and for those things that allow us to have a nice school system without a really high property tax like other towns nearby, I think is something that we have to really pay attention to, and we should be concerned about. We have a lot of built infrastructure that's dependent on retail, and I just wanted to kind of flag that as something for all of us to be aware of and maybe pay some special attention to.
I think to amplify Megan's point, I think the future of retail is very much in flux today, and how that will play itself out here in Williston, it really remains to be seen.
If anybody has any ideas on what to do to plan for that, though?
Diversify.
Okay, go ahead.
As always, diversify.
Or, yes, but I don't know what options we have really to diversify. I wonder if there might be like kind of I don't know if worst case scenarios really, but, you know, kind of a bad case scenario type projection, just to see what the impact would be on tax revenue and issues like, okay, if we're going to provide the same services, but we lost a bunch of retail revenue coming in as taxes, what would be the impact to homeowners in terms of a necessary increase in taxes. Those types of analysis at least would give us an idea of what's down the road.
I would think it was a wise move to at least look at that scenario.
So you will probably go from one of the lowest municipal tax rates to about the middle of the pack compared to all other Chittenden County towns.
So we lose about 20 to 30%?
I don't know
For
percent.
municipal income?
If I remember right, our effective rate is more around 50, it's like 28 right now, 29. And it'd be around 50% if we lost what came in.
We lost all of it.
Oh, lost all of it. You're right. That's a good point. Thank you.
Not
Yes.
all of that is, all that that goes into that effective tax rate is not just sales tax. There's also some fund balance in there, and there's also some other things. But a good part of it is the sales tax, for sure.
But Ted's point is also very valid. That's if we lost all the sales tax, and I don't think that's in anybody's worst case scenario.
One of the issues, and I don't want to get back into the weeds, but I do want to make a point that you're absolutely right. Things are changing, and I don't want to end up like, those will be the task corners will be the equivalent of coal mines, which are not being shut down because of regulation, but because the economy shifted with natural gas being cheaper and easier to burn and everything else. And I agree with you. The problem I'm having is it's a couple of things. First of all, we're a town of 8,000 people, and I'm not sure what we can do to say, hey, you know what, a lot of commerce, I mean, when we tax an event. When somebody buys something or sells something or brings income home or sells something as a capital gain. Those generally have been how any government has a tax. But those taxes are disappearing on the internet because you buy something from Land's End and, you may or may not put a sales tax on it, and it may or may not get it's just going to keep going like that. I mean, there's Amazon grocery and things like that. And I again, this brings me back to when the town budget was going up higher than the rate of inflation, and people were complaining about it, and they were right to complain about it. But what the counter to it was that the municipal rate of inflation, with what the town had to spend money on, petroleum products, tar, gasoline for the cars and everything else, was much higher than the consumer rate of inflation. And I was looking at this thinking, at the time we were confronting that issue, well, what the heck am I supposed to do about it? I mean, I'm not, we're not Congress, we're not the president, we're not anybody like that. We've got to buy these things, and that's just the way it is. And to some degree, I agree, we've got to do what we can do, and we've got to be active about it. But these global changes and these technological upheavals that are going on in the economy, we're going to feel, and I don't know,
So if I can give a small little answer, a tiny ray of hope, perhaps on a very small scale, I think there are things that we can do in the town plan and in our practice of planning, and obviously a few folks, things like the fact that we changed our bylaws to allow some of the craft brewers to expand in the industrial areas of the town, and then also to consider having a Class 1 restaurant license so that they could serve food and beer. So thinking about ways to diversify, even within the scope of our plan and bylaws, I think are totally possible. And so that's partly why I raise it, partly because the town is highly dependent on retail sales tax as an important revenue flow, but also because there are things that we can do, quite small incremental things, but that would help diversify locally.
Quite well taken.
Just an observation that once again, beer comes to the rescue.
Thank you, Jeff.
That's a great moment right there.
You've been waiting for that one.
So, can we move along?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So, one of the things we looked at are looking at figure 7.G. This is commuting patterns. And so this really just shows sort of where workers live, where Williston residents work. And so what does that graphic tell you? It tells you that we're a net importer of labor. So on a regular basis, you've got over 11,000 people every day are coming into Williston on average to work. And you got at the same time, you've got about 3,500 Williston residents who are leaving town to go and work somewhere else. You got about 850 who are, the graphic makes it look like they're spinning their wheels, but it really just means that they're living and working right here in Williston, all in one place. So there were a lot of workers that are coming in here. So that obviously has some implications for transportation. One of the things that we also know is that the jobs that people that live here are engaging in, the ones that are leaving Williston, are very different from a lot of the jobs that are people coming into Williston to take. So a lot of the labor that we import is labor for jobs that they may be in retail trade, they may be in some form of warehousing or manufacturing, so they may not be as high skilled and thus command as high a wage as a lot of the jobs that Williston residents who are leaving Williston to take are getting. So there's somewhat of a mismatch. That has some implications for a lot of the policies that we have in our plan. As we'll go down the objectives, so some of our objectives in the land use plan are to concentrate and focus commercial development in a relatively small area, say within the Taft Corners area, to preserve lands that are zoned industrial. So if we have a lot of workers who they may not have jobs at the higher end of the wage spectrum, one of the implications for that are for the town to consider to continue to support the utilization of transit. So ideally, you'd like those jobs to be located where transit is available, and so people would be able to utilize those modes because private car ownership may be more difficult of a hurdle if it's even attainable at all. And certainly we know from anecdotally from observation that there are a lot of people in, say, entry-level jobs, whether they're working at stores like Walmart or people that are employed at the hotels, changing linens and providing help for the kitchens and things of that sort. So there are a lot of workers, and if you look, you'll see them. They come into Williston by bus. So that's it has some implications for our transportation system. It has some implications for our land use goals within the town plan as well. And then related to that, you flip over the page and there's the graph that shows educational attainment. And when you compare Williston to the county, to the state, to the U.S., and basically what you see is that, Vermont has a higher rate of education than the country as a whole. Chittenden County, significantly higher than the state. And Williston, once again, significantly higher levels of educational attainment than the county. So we are, in many ways, sort of an outlier compared to the whole country. If you take Williston and then you go back and compare it to the United States. So we have people here who live here who have a lot of education. They tend to be highly skilled. And hopefully that will prepare them well for for employment in the future. So as we go into the objectives, so as I said before, within this chapter, in many ways, it's a new chapter, but nothing is really new. And really what we did was we pulled together objectives and strategies that we already had contained in other chapters of the town plan, and we pulled them together in one place. So you'll notice that they have some numbers on them that, like, for example, under 7.1, the objectives under it don't have number 7 at the beginning. It's because those they're a restate of things that are already included in the land use chapter, which is in chapter 3. So we have an objective in there that talks about the growth center in the Taft Corners area as a center for commerce, business, employment, obviously dominated by retail trade, and that part of our strategy is to promote pedestrian-friendly, design-conscious, as well as accessible to public transportation. So that's already included in the plan in another chapter. We also have an objective dealing with industrial lands. Williston does have a lot of land that's zoned for industrial uses, and that we would continue to support those industrial uses in areas that are zoned for industrial types of things. 7.2 talks about the transportation plan. So again, support of public transportation that would be accessible to where those employment centers are. That we would also work with the state to deal with some of the issues that are pertaining to the state highway system, which is very, very important for the town of Williston. The interstate is the most obvious, but we have two major state, surface state highways, Williston Road and Route 2A, that cross right in the heart of Taft Corners. Making improvements to those roads over time is going to require us to be working with the state of Vermont. It's not totally in our hands alone. So we identify working with the state on some of those issues. There are some issues that are in the town's control. So we'll get into this further in Chapter 7, but the town, and this is not a new objective, has a goal to build out what are called the grid streets in the Taft Corners area, which would help to distribute traffic, to provide people with a variety of ways to get around. Those would include things like bicycle pedestrian facilities, accessible to transit. In some cases, it means the town works towards plugging in holes or gaps in the system that have occurred for a wide variety of reasons. So Zephyr Road that goes through Finney Crossing, I would give as just one example of the grid street network. Now, that road didn't even exist 5 years ago. That's a street that provides access to Finney Crossing, but if anybody that's driven down there knows, it's also a way to get you quickly from Shaw's over to the post office. So it helps traffic to move around. It is equipped with a bicycle pedestrian facility, so it's really designed to be multimodal. The street that goes behind where Panera Bread and CVS, that's also an example of a segment of the grid street. There are others that we hope to see get built out over time, but that's part of the town's commitment to building out a transportation system that's going to help us to address some of these issues. And then also freight movement is important. I don't know that there are any particular things that the town would do per se, but they could play themselves over time. And there's, the railroad line goes through Williston. It doesn't really touch directly on the areas that are areas for employment in town. But it could be a factor in a number of ways as we move forward. And then related to some of our land use goals, continue to maintain available wastewater treatment capacity. It's certainly a well-discussed item, but for the town to be able to support job growth, I think probably the most notable example on that score was a couple of years ago when Keurig Green Mountain Coffee Roasters wanted to develop a new product line in Williston, and they came to the town and requested an additional 10,000 gallons per day of wastewater treatment capacity, and the town was in a position to be able to provide that. That was a request that I don't know that anybody saw it coming per se. It just kind of came out of nowhere. But that's how things happen sometimes. You don't necessarily know exactly what something is going to be and when it's likely to occur. But that was one where the town had this infrastructure asset we were able to make available. Unfortunately, the product line didn't work out the way Keurig Green Mountain Coffee Roasters anticipated. That's also part of the game, too. You never know where the hits and misses are going to be. But it is something that is important for the town moving forward. And then we also have supporting affordable housing. So in Objective 5.2, within the Housing and Growth Management section, we talk about using growth management to provide, to support the provision of a range of housing types and choices for households, across a broad range. And that the town should also continue to support the development of more affordable housing. And then on the education score, I think we tend to focus a lot on whether it's K through 8 or K through 12. But from a land use perspective, the town probably has more of an influence over Vermont Tech. So the school system is really a separate government. It kind of exists in its own sphere. Vermont Tech is really kind of like a private entity in terms of how they interface with the town. So this is not a new objective. It's a restatement of a position the town has had in the past, which is to say we're in support of the activities of VTC. In the past, at different times, VTC has expressed an interest to expand its campus and its range of offerings. The town at various times has taken very deliberate steps to support VTC in that regard. So, having said that, I'll stop right there and see if there's any questions.
Question I have, and is there a role in the town plan, thus is there a role for the town under economic development to perhaps encourage maybe commercial industrial type growth, maybe discourage, and also are there specific type industries or commercial entities that we want to attract to Williston? I don't know exactly how we would do it, if there's really a role in which a town like Williston can do that, but certainly I see plenty of TV ads that come from New York State that tout what a great, tax environment they have, encouraging industries to locate in New York State. I'm kind of groping here for exactly, what it is. I don't want to say I'm looking for, I'm just wondering if there's a role for the town plan to play in this, but it's that concept of, do we want this non-residential type growth? We just saw a graph that showed how much sales occur in Williston. We can translate that into how much revenue comes in because of the local options tax. Certainly that's a benefit to retail, wanting retail to locate in Williston. Also, there's some large liabilities that come with retail growth or expansion, if you will. Is there a way in which the town plan can kind of balance those out and come up with some, I don't even know if the word's recommendation, maybe goals for the town, and maybe start to outline strategies the town can use to achieve those goals, whether they be incentives or something else? So does that make sense, first of all?
I think I understand the question. As I understand it, I think the way the town has approached that has been through what I would call a lot of sort of the garden variety things that we do in our planning program, which is to say, we understand that those things are there and that they're important, and how do they play out both from, from a land use perspective. So we have lands that are available for certain kinds of uses. So the inverse of that, there are some communities that say there are certain things we don't want, and they zone them out. And I would say that we as a town haven't really done that. Part of it is how does it play out, in the marketplace. But I think we've had a fairly aggressive or supportive stance, certainly related to industrial development within areas that are suitable for industry. We've had a very supportive stance relative to when it used to be IBM and now Global Foundries. As you may recall, 3 or 4 years ago, we amended our bylaws and expanded the range of uses that are allowed on the campus of now Global Foundries, which on the Williston side of the river is now become sort of more of an office park than a single tenant type operation. So, those would be some examples of, I think, of the kind of things that we've done. as well as to support the provision of transportation infrastructure, and then, we talk about water and sewer infrastructure. So that's been the approach that we've had in the past. Certainly in my time here, we have not taken the approach of saying the planning office isn't an economic development office. Some people think we're out, chumming the waters for this kind of business or that kind of business, and we're not. We're really approaching it more from sort of a bigger picture sort of perspective, from a town-wide perspective of dealing with land use and infrastructure along those lines.
So if I could repeat back to you what I just heard to make sure, I kind of get it, is kind of the stay the course is what's, for lack of better words, recommended. I mean, it's not recommended, but it's stay the course in terms of what it is we're currently doing. We don't need to do something additional or maybe something very different to either attract or maybe in some cases not attract certain types.
Well, I think your question really goes back to one of Terry Zitrich's questions at the very beginning, is there's this tension as a town like Williston that is a growing community. There are people that want to move here. There are businesses that want to move here, that want to be here. And those can be good things, but there's a balance that we try to aim for. Certainly on the development review side, and you guys don't really see that part, but in the planning office we do, we hear from both sides. And, when somebody comes in with something new, it's not always, but sometimes there are people that they don't like it. They don't want there to be change. They want things to be the way they always remember them to be. So there can be a tension as people say, well, we have traffic congestion. Is this just going to make it worse? So that is part of the balancing act. That I think that's included within all of what we try to do within the town plan.
I think that balancing act is a very good way to describe it, and I guess part of what I'm asking is there a role of the town plan to try to address where is maybe that best balance for Williston? But it sounds like the answer is no, not really.
Anybody else in the commission?
Well, it seems like the town plan might not be quite the place to do that. I mean, as Ken said, the planning office is not an economic development office. And
But
so.
if you don't mind, Megan, if I can play the devil's advocate,
Sure.
we do it with residential.
In what way?
Well, limit the number of housing, the 80 units per year, so many in the town growth center part, so
Right.
many outside.
And we do some of that for commercial entities through zoning. We limit where they can go. We limit what they can do in different places. There's use, approved
Look at it from the
uses.
standpoint, is this a good amount? Is this a healthy amount of, at least I feel, and I'm not saying we necessarily need to do this. I'm trying to explore the idea and see if maybe there is a role. There very well may not be.
Well, a lot of it too is that a lot of what the planning staff deal with are requests and they respond, right? So we have this sort of living document, two living documents, really, the plan and the bylaws, and they're responsive to requests. And sometimes we change them because, farmers, agricultural entities would like to be able to advertise better, and so we work with them on our sign ordinance or something like that. But I think most of the role, and Ken should speak up if I'm misrepresenting you, but it seems like a lot of the role is more like we're in a privileged position where we have quite a lot of growth and there is a lot of demand. And so it's been a bit more of a kind of reactive or managing perspective rather than having to go out and beat the bushes. And from the materials that I have read, I teach economic geography, so
Right up, it sounds like this.
yeah, I mean, the places that give tax abatements or, free utilities for 5 years in order for this factory to open, those kinds of things, every study has shown those are either a wash or they're a negative value for the place, for the municipality. So in terms of going out and trying to shop for new, big employers or something like that, first of all, it doesn't seem, based on our data, that we really need to do that. at this point, but also, they aren't necessarily worth it. So I would just put those kind of cautionary pieces into play.
It's interesting data, so I was kind of wondering the same thing, you hear about technology park or some other, attraction, but you have to be very careful of what you ask for because, you don't want trucking companies, you got to decide what kind of business and where do you have the room to accommodate, the infrastructure and still allow the residential growth, so.
Jeff has, in the past, has asked a question during budget time, I think, about the mix. Do we have the right mix of commercial versus residential? And I don't
Right,
know.
and look at it from the revenue we get from taxes, how much comes from the residents versus how much comes from the non-residential sources of tax revenue, and is that a good, healthy mix? Thank you, Rick, I appreciate you bringing that back up. And I have no idea, I just don't know, and I would love it if there was a way in which somebody could look at it and say, yeah, that's about right, for your community, that kind of fits, or no, you really ought to be looking towards, I don't know, increasing one or the other. I mean, obviously, if you increase the residential, it has a direct impact on residences, which, everybody knows how that will be reacted to. Does that beg but the question is, is there a reason to increase our non-residential tax base? And then if the answer is yes, what's the best way to go about that? And I just don't know the answer. Do we have a healthy mix right now? I don't think we have an unhealthy mix, don't get me wrong. But, would it be better, I don't know what the numbers are, how much comes from
Anecdotally, we're popular communities for residential and business. So it seems like we might have the right mix, but I don't have any empirical data that would support that.
The good news about that is it puts us in the driver's seat, which I think I've heard said, and, so we are in a position, if there is a benefit to doing this, to start driving, if you will.
Don't we, correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, but didn't you say last year that our residential tax rates bring in more income than we spend on services for residences?
I don't know if I said that.
I thought that's what you said, because I was asking about what's the effect on increasing residential population on the tax rate? And I thought you said it was inversely proportional.
And Rick, as you're trying to think of the answer, I'm going back to the Mike Munson study, the cost of development study, where if I remember, and I remember there's some, the town actually put together a study that looked at what is the cost of residential development.
Actually, it focused more on commercial.
Did it?
Because, and it's coming back to me now, yes. Because education is funded statewide and not locally, every home we add, we get more revenue, I think, than services required. Businesses would be the reverse, except for the fact that we have the local options tax.
Which is paid by?
Partially by residents and partly by outsiders.
Right, so we subsidize the businesses already. So adding more businesses would cost us more.
I don't know.
They demand more services than,
Except for the options tax, and the options tax, the way I was thinking, we pay that too, right?
Right.
But we do have, the benefit is we have outside community members paying.
We pay too, yes, and obviously that's a benefit, but I would hope that somebody who chooses to buy something in Williston isn't doing it just to buy something in Williston, they're buying something they need or want, So whether they buy it in Williston or South Burlington, or maybe even online, there's a definite benefit that they, buy to us to buy it in Williston. So I don't necessarily separate out the Williston component versus the non-Williston. It's more the aspect of, that local options tax is a significant piece of our revenue coming in. Do we want it to be a more significant piece, realizing there are liabilities that come with that? And, what's the answer to that? And of course, the answer is there's no clear-cut yes, no, 20% or something like that.
It'd be nice to maintain it over time, that we don't lose it, and
Well, that's a scary
somehow we
problem.
move from, we maybe move from big box stores that are going out of business to smaller boutique, higher end, in those grid streets maybe, I don't know, or within the box stores carved up into
Yeah.
little mini shopping malls, or I don't know what you call them, but.
And so having said that, all those kind of decisions are essentially, those are market-determined decisions. So, Williston has a lot of big boxes because there was a period of time where there was pressure to do that. Williston had land available, and in fact, some of those decisions weren't made by people here in the town, but they were made by courts of law. But those things happened in a period of time, and could somebody still today build another big box store in Williston? Yeah, they could. They wouldn't be able to do it exactly the way they did before for a variety of reasons, but nonetheless, we're not necessarily stopping them, but it's not happening. And why isn't it happening? Well, it's because there's something that's changed in the marketplace. On the same token, we do have things within our town plan and within our regulations where we say, yeah, we'd like to see a more of a mixed-use kind of grainy development. Maybe that's something more like where Verizon and Panera Bread is, and with the grid streets. So we're all in favor of that. But just because we said it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen.
To highlight your example, am I wrong that there actually is that the Jeff Davis development entity has the ability to put in another box store in the Walmart area right now? I thought they had the sewer and everything.
I think right next to PetSmart, isn't it? Right on the right side.
Right,
Yeah,
so.
okay.
And we're not stopping them. That's the market. That's good
By the
old
way,
capitalism.
That's an interesting example, because back then, the town was actually opposed to lots of more big boxes than he had already built, because the town was concerned that we would be putting too much of our eggs in the retail basket. And mixed use was the mantra that we kept talking about. And of course, Jeff Davis was wanting to boil more. And so a compromise was reached back in, I don't know, early 2000, I think, so that he could build one or two more, and that would be it. And that lot next to the PetSmart is one of the last lots we had.
And it's not the same scale as a Walmart or a big box, if you'll excuse the expression, but we did permit the construction of a tire store just a year ago. So that was permittable under the town's development regulations. At the same time, in that building, there's actually another suite in there that could be made available for another tenant, whether it's a coffee shop or a something. So a type of mixed use. So we've tried to pull for those sorts of things. We've also seen, I don't know if they've opened their doors yet, they will soon if they haven't already, the rehab gym, which is owned by a Williston resident, expanding into its own building called Kismet next to where People's United Bank is. And again, not a gigantic box, but it's a building that comes up to the street, has many of the design elements that we'd like to see. And in fact, it's actually really going to be a collection of a variety of businesses within it. So, we are, trying to do, some of both of those kinds of things. There are some things that a developer might be able to do. It's not that our regulations stop them, but part of it is going to be determined by the marketplace and what kind of demand there is for those kinds of things, whether it's here in Williston or elsewhere.
Nuclear power plant. rendering facility, rendering plant, and a correctional facility.
Tanneries.
A tannery, looking for tanneries.
I hope that's after my time, Ted, I do.
What the market will demand.
Yes. So that was what we wanted to cover tonight. And then the other part of it was, so the Planning Commission, as staff has been talking, the Planning Commission really wanted to try to get a sense from you folks where you folks want to go within the town plan. And then so within that, one of the things that I believe you received is what we prepared was this document. And I'll tell you, just in case there's any confusion as to what it is. So within the town plan, both the town plan in effect now and the proposed town plan, in the last chapter, so in the proposed town plan, it's chapter 14. In the 11-16 plan, it's chapter 13. There's a restatement of every goal and objective in the plan, gets restated in that table at the end. And there are a bunch of columns that are included in there that includes things like who's going to do it and how much do we think it's going to cost and when are we going to do it. For the purposes of this exercise, what we did was we kind of truncated and merged these two tables together. So you have on the left-hand side, you have all the goals and objectives from the 2011-2016 plan. And on the right side, you have all the goals and objectives from the 2016-2024 plan. And then what we did was we lined them up. And so if you see a blank cell on one side, it means that it's an item that is either a new item or it's an item that got dropped out for one reason or another. So on the first page, for example, you see 3.1.5 says consider form-based codes. There's a blank cell in the 11-16 plan because that's a new item. So that would be an example of a new item that we're proposing in this plan that did not, was not included in the previous plan. If we go to the bottom of how I have it paginated here, I think, oh yeah, so if you go to 3.3.2 on the left-hand side, it says study transportation improvements along Industrial Avenue. That's something that we did during the lifetime of the last plan. You look across to the right-hand side and you'll see it's not there. And so that also tells you that there's a change from the 11-16 plan to the 16-24 plan. And the numbers will sort of line up until you get to the place where you insert chapter 7, which is the economic development chapter. Obviously, it's a new chapter, and then that makes all the numbers change after that. But essentially, that it was designed to provide you with a shortcut to show you where there are proposed changes between the 11-16 plan and then the 16-24 plan.
So we obviously need to make this a priority to get this taken care of as far as our meetings go. So is it possible for us to take up like 3 things each night that we meet or that we schedule it in for roughly an hour and a half or so?
I'll be here.
Really, we could do this any way you want. What we'd like to do is really try to focus in on what's of most interest to you. I mean, if you want to, that's why Ken did this, so you can see like where are the changes, and really that's obviously where you want to look. What's different from last time, and then of those, what's like, yeah, that's fine, no problem, or what's going to be something you really want to have more questions on. What do you have concerns about? What do you want to see more fleshed out? We want you to kind of direct where the conversation will go. I mean, like we said, it is a big document, and this could take, you saw the pace of tonight. We went over just a couple of very simple chapters that didn't have a whole lot of contentious things to talk about. It's just some data, and it took, the better part of an hour and a half. So when we start getting into some of the real directive policy type things, like that could take a long time. So we really try to focus in on, do your homework if you can, and we're already getting a flavor of where some of your interests may already lie. I think on the last 5 years ago when we did this, we had an idea of where some of those interests were, and it made the job a little bit easier. And again, so if you can just point us in the right direction, I think that'll funnel everything down.
So should we go back and study this and then send you an email, or send Ken an email, or saying, we might all have different...
Yeah, I think there's going to be a bit of...
Yeah, we expect that you'll all have different priorities, and some will overlap, for sure.
Before we meet again, which won't be until June at this point, we need to make a recommendation to Rick and to Ken as to what we want to put on the agenda for the next foreseeable meeting or two, anyway. So,
Oh, you want to make that recommendation now?
well, I want to make a recommendation that we get this done in our comments to Rick and to Ken, hopefully within the next week or so.
Okay,
And that
that's
way,
fair.
otherwise we won't get it done, so.
It would be good if you would tell us which, say, sections you're going to focus on based on our input, so we can study those ahead of time.
Sure.
You may have done it this time, but I missed it, because I just like read the first 6
Well, he did,
sections.
in his memo to us, he indicated which ones he was going to be taking up
I
tonight,
missed that.
so.
It looks like our next meeting that we can take this up, unless we schedule a special meeting, would be June 20th.
It may be that we're gonna have to have at least one special meeting to take up the, to get this taken care of in a reasonable amount of time.
So Rick, you just said the next opportunity for the select board would be June the 20th? So not the June 9th meeting?
June 6th.
6th meeting? No?
No, they've got some stormwater stuff.
Okay, all right.
Well, that'll just take 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, that also, I guess what that also means then is if, you may want to consider whether it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes at your June 6th meeting, is if you need to, reach some sort of consensus about where you want the commission to focus on, because that would certainly give us enough time to prepare. And then, we'll be better prepared to, address those particular chapters.
Hopefully with us doing our homework, we can get to that point on June 6th to tell you what we.
I would just say that my own personal pitch is that 2 chapters that influence almost everything else in the plan, whether they're controversial or not, is Chapter 3 pertaining to land use, because it contains a lot of core elements that affect everything else that we do in the plan. Certainly the transportation chapter, because that, we've touched on it a little bit tonight. It ripples throughout the rest of the plan as well. And then the other is, as you've already uncovered, is the housing growth management piece. Every town plan cycle, that's been an important piece, and it looks like this is going to be no exception. Having said that housing growth management piece, depending on how deep we get into it, that may be something that's all we do in one session. But those would be just some thoughts that I would offer on that.
That's helpful, thank you. So thanks, all of you members of the commission, too, for your hard work over a long period of time now. And, thanks for being here tonight. So, we've done our agenda. So our homework is within the next week to get back to Rick and to Ken with our suggestions.
Okay.
And we've covered other business, so unless somebody has something that they wish to talk about tonight, we're done, and I'll say we're adjourned.
Scott, are these on live now?
Yes, so.
Yeah, I was trying to,
Streaming tonight.
where, how do
We're
I?
streaming live on our YouTube channel. Channel 17 has a YouTube channel.
Channel 7.
So look up Channel 17
this
Center
one?
for Community and
And
Democracy.
do you want
On YouTube?
And my agenda is on there.
All right,
Look for live events happening now, something like that. I think it's,
finally,
and,
finally, my friends and family will be able to watch live.
Sure.
I make an iMovie with the highlights every week for them, but that's labor intensive.